I took my wife on what was supposed to be a dream work trip, but one unexpected discovery changed everything. What happened next is something I never saw coming. My name's Jake, I'm 34, and I've been married to my wife, Emily, for 6 years. Emily's 31, and if you met her, you'd probably see what I saw when I first met her: smart, beautiful, and this magnetic energy that can light up a room. We've had a good marriage, ups and downs like anyone, but nothing I couldn't handle, until now. So, a couple of weeks ago, my boss called me into his office with news that was pretty much a dream scenario: a business trip to a stunning resort destination. Not just any trip, but a big one, where I'd be leading the team, networking, closing deals. The kind of trip that can be exhausting but incredible, too. Right then, I had this idea: why not make it a little romantic getaway? Emily and I had both been stressed with work, barely catching time together. It felt like a chance to reconnect. When I asked her to come with me, I wasn't sure what to expect. But when I told her, her eyes lit up. She hugged me and agreed right away, saying she could definitely use a change of scenery and some sun. It felt like a relief, like maybe this trip could be a turning point for us, a way to bring back that spark we'd been missing. With Emily on board, everything started feeling better. We threw ourselves into planning. She took on picking out outfits, listing places she wanted to visit, and talking about all the things we could do at the resort. It felt exciting, like we were preparing for our first real trip as a couple again. We laughed, joked about what drinks we'd try on the beach, and picked out restaurants for romantic dinners. For the first time in a while, I felt like we were on the same page. Still, even with the excitement building, there was this tiny, nagging feeling I couldn't ignore. It wasn't anything big, just little things. Emily seemed extra attentive to details about the trip. She'd ask me about the colleagues who'd be there, the timing of events, the plans for each night. She'd joke and say she was just being thorough, that she wanted us to be ready to enjoy every minute. I brushed it off, happy to see her excited. But on the nights leading up to our departure, she was more attached to her phone than usual. Late one night, I noticed her texting someone, smiling to herself. When I asked who it was, she just laughed it off, saying, "Oh, it's nothing, just work stuff. Don't worry, I'll be all yours once we're on that beach." And I wanted to believe her. I really did. I put those doubts out of my mind, figuring I was just being paranoid, and kept my focus on the trip. After all, a vacation together was exactly what we needed, or so I thought. The day of the trip finally arrived, and I'll admit, I was more excited than I'd been in a long time. Emily and I hadn't done something spontaneous like this in years, and the idea of just being away together, away from the stress and routines, felt like exactly what we needed. We packed our bags, got through security, and soon enough, we were on the plane, settling in for the long flight. Emily looked relaxed, already leafing through a travel magazine, occasionally pointing out places she wanted to explore once we got there. For a while, things felt normal again. Like they used to. We laughed about the cheesy airplane food, watched some in-flight movies, and even held hands as we dozed off, leaning into each other. I could feel myself letting go of that little voice in the back of my mind that had been pestering me about her secrecy, about the late nights on her phone. Maybe I'd just been stressed and paranoid. But, as we touched down, that small, nagging feeling crept back. Emily had been particularly focused on her phone as we were landing, typing out something quickly before slipping it into her bag. When I glanced over, she noticed and quickly smiled, almost as if she'd caught herself. "Just finishing up some work texts so I can be off the grid for the next week," she said, giving me a reassuring squeeze on my hand. "Good," I replied, letting my own doubts slip away as best as I could. I wanted to trust her. We were here, after all, about to have the trip of a lifetime. When we arrived at the resort, it was as beautiful as the pictures, if not more so. Palm trees, blue water stretching as far as the eye could see, and that warm, salty air you only find by the ocean. Emily's face lit up as we walked through the entrance, like all her stress had melted away in an instant. She even took my hand, pulling me toward the beach as soon as we checked in, eager to take in the sunset together. But that evening, as we settled into our room after dinner, I couldn't ignore how often she was still glancing at her phone. She'd been her charming, engaging self throughout dinner, but there was a distance that kept creeping in, just for a moment, whenever her phone buzzed. She'd look at it, her face going unreadable, before quickly putting it away and smiling back up at me. Later, as we were winding down for the night, she stepped out onto the balcony, phone in hand. I watched her from the bed, and in that moment, it felt like she was a million miles away. She stood there for a long time, typing and scrolling, her face illuminated by the glow of her screen against the backdrop of the night sky. Finally, I couldn't keep it in. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She jumped, as if startled, and turned to me with a smile that seemed a bit too quick. "Oh, yeah. Just making sure I've wrapped everything up with work. Tomorrow, no more distractions. I promise." I forced a smile and nodded, telling myself again that I was overreacting. She was my wife, the woman I'd married and trusted for years. But as I lay awake that night, listening to the sound of the ocean outside, I couldn't help but wonder, was there something else she wasn't telling me? The next morning, I left early to join my team for our planning meeting. As the team lead, I was responsible for setting up the objectives for the week, making sure everyone knew their tasks, and handling any issues that came up. I left Emily sleeping in the room, the sunlight filtering in through the curtains, casting a warm glow over her as she lay there peacefully. I couldn't help but smile. Maybe this trip was exactly what we needed after all. When I got to the meeting room, most of my team was already gathered around, looking energized and ready to go. I went over the week's objectives, laying out each task we needed to accomplish and checking that everyone was clear on their responsibilities. But about halfway through, I noticed someone was missing. One of my colleagues, Rob, wasn't there. He was usually punctual, the type who showed up early to everything, so it felt odd not seeing him here. "Where's Rob?" I asked, glancing around. One of the guys, Brian, shrugged and said, "Oh, he got food poisoning last night. He said he was up all night feeling terrible. Probably just needs a day to recover." I frowned but nodded. "All right, well, make sure to tell him to take it easy. I don't want anyone getting too sick here. We came to get work done, and we need to finish everything on time. So, everyone, be careful with what you eat." The team chuckled, and we got back to discussing the work ahead. By the time the meeting wrapped up, we had a solid plan, and everyone was set to start. I headed back to my room, looking forward to a relaxing afternoon with Emily. When I returned to the room, Emily wasn't there. I figured she'd decided to take advantage of the weather and hit the beach. After all, she'd been looking forward to some time to herself, and we talked about her exploring the area while I was tied up with meetings. I changed into swim trunks, grabbed a towel, and made my way down to the beach, eager to join her. As I strolled along the shore, scanning the crowd for Emily, I noticed a familiar face among the beachgoers. It was Rob, sitting under an umbrella, sipping a drink and looking quite relaxed. I raised an eyebrow, surprised to see him out here after hearing about his supposed food poisoning. "Oh, so you're feeling better already?" I asked as I walked up, unable to hide my surprise. Rob looked up, startled for a second before recovering with a sheepish grin. "Hey, Jake. Yeah, I'm all right. Must have been something I ate, but I bounced back pretty quickly. I should be good to go for tomorrow." "Glad to hear it," I said, smiling but feeling something slightly off about the whole thing. "Well, take it easy today. We'll need you at full strength tomorrow." He nodded, giving me a thumbs up, and turned back to his drink. I continued along the beach, scanning for Emily, but I couldn't shake the strange feeling I'd gotten from seeing Rob there, lounging like he didn't have a care in the world. After a few minutes, I spotted Emily further down the shore, lying on a beach chair with a book in hand, looking completely at ease. I walked up to her, deciding to let the weirdness of the morning go. This trip was supposed to be about relaxing, reconnecting, and maybe finally putting my own anxieties to rest. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. As I settled into the beach chair next to Emily, she looked up from her book, giving me a warm smile. It felt good, like we were both unwinding and really sinking into the vacation vibe. The waves were crashing gently in the distance, and the sun was warm, with a light breeze making everything feel perfect. Just as we were starting to relax, I noticed Rob walking toward us, his towel slung over his shoulder, drink still in hand. He gave a casual wave, clearly aiming to join us. "Mind if I hang out here?" he asked, glancing between me and Emily. "Figured I'd come down and enjoy the sun, since I've got the day off anyway." "Not at all," I said, gesturing to the empty chair beside us. "Pull up a seat. I'm glad to see you're feeling better." He chuckled, sitting down and stretching out. "Yeah, that was a close call. Nothing worse than getting sick on a work trip." I gave him a quick nod. I actually mentioned that during our meeting this morning, told everyone to be careful about what they eat so no one else goes through it. I filled him in on the rest of the planning meeting, the timeline for the week, and how we were adjusting tasks to account for his absence. Rob listened, nodding along, though he seemed more focused on the scenery than on the specifics of the meeting. Every now and then, I caught him glancing over at Emily, but I brushed it off. We were all here to relax, and she was just as much a part of this trip as any of us. The conversation shifted between light talk about work, plans for exploring the resort, and which beachside restaurants we'd heard were worth trying. After a while, I got up to grab us some drinks. As I walked up to the bar, I looked back and saw Rob and Emily laughing about something, sharing a casual chat. For a moment, I felt a twinge of discomfort, but I dismissed it as nothing more than my overactive imagination. Emily and I were here to reconnect, and Rob was just a friend and coworker tagging along. I returned with our drinks, determined to enjoy the day and put any strange feelings out of my mind. We were on vacation, after all, and I didn't want to ruin it by reading too much into anything. The next morning, I headed back to the conference room for our second planning meeting, hoping to wrap up early so I could spend the afternoon with Emily. She'd seemed genuinely relaxed and happy yesterday, and for the first time in months, it felt like we were finally getting back to our old selves. This trip was shaping up to be exactly what we needed. Everyone was already gathered when I walked into the room, including Rob, who seemed fully recovered and ready to jump back into things. I caught his eye as I sat down, and he nodded with a casual smile, as if nothing had happened yesterday. I shook it off and focused on the tasks ahead, going over everyone's assignments, deadlines, and our goals for the rest of the week. After the meeting ended, most of the team packed up and headed out, but I had a few managerial tasks to handle. I sent Emily a quick text, "Hey, got a few things to wrap up here. I'll probably be back around 2 or 3 p.m. Her response came almost immediately. "Of course, my love red heart, I'll be waiting for you." Her message made me smile, and I felt a little lighter as I dived back into work. Despite the long list of tasks and final preparations, the idea of spending the afternoon with her kept me motivated. I worked through the morning, dealing with emails, finalizing reports, and setting up meetings for later in the week. By the time I looked at the clock, it was nearly 2:30. I wrapped up as quickly as I could and headed back toward our room, eager to get out of my work clothes and take her out for a late lunch. But as I approached the room, I had this strange feeling in my gut, like something was off, even though I couldn't put my finger on why. Brushing it aside, I reminded myself that I was probably just tired from the long morning and eager to see Emily. Little did I know, things were about to take a turn I never saw coming. As I walked down the hallway toward our room, I felt a sense of anticipation, excitement even, to finally be done with work and spend the rest of the day with Emily. But as I got closer, I noticed something odd, a faint murmur of voices coming from inside. I paused, straining to hear, and then I caught a few words that made my stomach drop. It's time for you to go, Emily's voice said, quiet but urgent. My husband will be back soon. A chill ran through me. Every instinct was telling me to turn around, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But I couldn't stop myself. My hand found the door handle, and before I could think it through, I pushed the door open. There, on the bed we'd shared, was Emily, with Rob beside her, looking startled as he scrambled to pull up the sheets. The color drained from Emily's face as her eyes locked onto mine, frozen with guilt and shock. Without thinking, I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo. I didn't know what I would do with it or why I even needed it, but in that moment, I needed something concrete. Proof of what I was seeing with my own eyes. Proof that this wasn't some nightmare I could wake up from. Neither of them moved, and for a long moment, the silence was unbearable. My mind was spinning, racing through every moment from the past few days, every shared laugh, every affectionate look, every little, "I love you," she'd whispered to me. And now, standing here, I felt that world I thought we'd built crashing down around me. Standing there, staring at Emily and Rob, I felt a rage I'd never known before. I was done with betrayal, done with being lied to by the people I trusted most. My mind was already calculating, devising a way to make them regret every decision that had led to this moment. I left the room without a word, shutting the door behind me, and walked straight to the hotel lobby. I needed information, and fast. After a quick chat with the hotel staff, I learned that they offered an email and fax service for guests, something I'd need for what I had in mind. I started by uploading the photo I'd taken onto my phone's shared cloud drive, making sure I had it accessible from any device. Then, I sent the photo in an email to all of our colleagues back at the office, along with a brief message. To the team, I thought you should all know why Rob has been missing meetings and why Emily won't be joining us for the rest of this trip. Best, Jake. I watched as the email sent, picturing their faces as they opened it. Every single colleague, every person Rob tried to impress, and everyone who thought Emily was the loyal, supportive wife she pretended to be, they'd all know the truth now. But that was just the beginning. Next, I drafted an email to our boss. I attached the photo, along with a clear description of Rob's behavior, how he'd feigned food poisoning to skip work and how he'd betrayed both me and the company by jeopardizing the project's integrity. I recommended disciplinary action, explaining that I'd be withdrawing from the project if Rob were to remain on the team. This wasn't just revenge, it was setting the record straight. Rob had crossed every boundary, professionally and personally, and I wasn't about to let him get away with it. Emily had always been cautious with money, but what she didn't know was that I had access to her accounts. She trusted me with everything. I transferred a good portion of her savings into our joint account, leaving just enough to cover her essential bills, and then cleared the rest into a personal account I'd set up just for myself. I also took it a step further. Emily had a few subscription services, streaming accounts, and memberships she'd loved and never missed a payment on. I canceled each one, going through her emails and deleting confirmation receipts, making sure she wouldn't notice right away. She'd come home to an empty bank account, and those luxuries she loved. Gone. I returned to the room just as Emily was dressing, her face a mix of dread and desperation. Rob was nowhere in sight, probably out of sheer shame. I walked over, my expression cold. "It's over, Emily," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "When we get back home, you'll find your things packed. We're done, and you won't be seeing a single cent of what's left of our money." Her eyes widened, but she had no words. She knew there was no way to fix this, no chance to undo the damage. As I left, I felt no remorse, only the satisfaction that I'd given them exactly what they deserved. When I landed back home, I didn't waste a second. I went straight to the courthouse and filed for divorce. I'd already told my lawyer the essentials, sent him everything he needed, the photos, the details of what had happened, and the financial statements showing how I'd reclaimed our joint funds. He agreed it was a clear-cut case, one that would leave Emily with as little claim as possible. With the paperwork filed, I headed back to the house. The home I'd shared with Emily now felt hollow, filled with memories that were tainted by the thought of her betrayal. But I was done with dwelling on the past. I moved through each room like a man on a mission, packing up her belongings piece by piece. I didn't leave anything behind that belonged to her: clothes, books, jewelry, every trace of her life here, packed away. I grabbed a set of moving boxes, carefully labeled them with her name, and stacked them neatly by the front door. I found myself feeling oddly calm, as if each box I packed was another piece of closure, another step toward freeing myself from her lies. Then I did something that felt long overdue: I changed the locks. I didn't want her to have any reason to believe she could simply walk back into my life. This was it, the final boundary, ensuring she couldn't slip back in like nothing had happened. Once I was done, I texted her a single message: "Your things are packed and ready for pickup. Let me know when you're coming, and I'll make sure I'm out." She replied almost instantly, her message filled with attempts at explanation, apology, and promises that she could change, that things didn't have to end like this. But I'd already heard all I needed to. Without another word, I blocked her number. That evening, I stood in the doorway of my empty, quiet home, looking at the boxes stacked up and realizing that the hardest part was over. Emily would come, take her things, and leave. And as for me, I was ready to finally start fresh, without her lies weighing me down. I knew Emily wasn't going to just accept the divorce without a fight. In the days that followed, I received notice after notice from her lawyer, all pointing to one thing: she was determined to get whatever she could from me. This was no longer about apologies or regrets. She'd realized I was done with her, and now she wanted to inflict damage in any way she could. When our first court hearing arrived, I walked in prepared, my lawyer by my side. Emily was already there, sitting across the room with a hardened look I barely recognized. She'd swapped out the pleas and sweet talk for cold determination. She wanted her cut, of the house, of our savings, of anything she could stake a claim to. Her lawyer argued that she'd contributed to our household and had a right to half of what we owned. But my lawyer was sharp, and I'd come prepared. He countered each argument, pulling out the financial records, proof that I had been the sole provider. Every vacation, every luxury we enjoyed, it had all come from my income. My lawyer also highlighted the fact that we'd both signed a prenuptial agreement years ago, one that clearly stated that our individual earnings and any assets we had before marriage would remain separate. The prenup was airtight, and Emily knew it, but she was clearly hoping to find some loophole, anything that would entitle her to more. Then there was the matter of her infidelity. We presented the evidence, the photos, text messages, and accounts from my co-workers who had witnessed her with Rob during the trip. Her betrayal wasn't just personal, it had crossed into our professional lives as well. My lawyer argued that her actions had been the primary cause for the divorce, further weakening any claim she had to my assets. Emily's face went pale as my lawyer laid everything out. Her lawyer attempted to downplay it, calling it a momentary lapse in judgment. But the evidence was clear, and each piece chipped away at her case. The court wasn't buying it. The session dragged on for hours, with Emily becoming visibly frustrated as the judge sided with us on issue after issue. By the time the hearing ended, her chances of walking away with anything were slim. I could see the anger in her eyes as we left the courtroom, her face contorted with the realization that her plan had backfired. She had tried to break me and take everything she could, but instead, she was the one left with nothing. I walked out of the courthouse that day feeling the weight of it all finally beginning to lift. As I prepared for the next court date, I thought I'd seen the worst of it. I was ready to put all this behind me and move on. But then, a bombshell landed in my lap, a piece of information that turned the entire case on its head. One evening, my lawyer called, his tone a mix of shock and excitement. "Jake, I just uncovered something that changes everything. It turns out Emily's been hiding even more than we thought. Apparently, during our marriage, Emily hadn't only been unfaithful with Rob. She'd also been siphoning money from our joint accounts and funneling it into a secret account I'd known nothing about. This wasn't just infidelity, it was theft. Emily had essentially been stealing from me while pretending to be the supportive, loyal wife. My lawyer dug deeper, and as he pulled up transaction records and emails linking Emily to the account, it became clear this was no mistake or misunderstanding. She'd been taking funds from the joint account in small, regular transfers, likely hoping I wouldn't notice. Over the years, she'd managed to siphon off thousands, all while building this hidden reserve for herself. When we brought this evidence to the next court hearing, Emily's face went pale. She had no idea we'd discovered her secret stash. The judge listened as my lawyer laid out the financial records, each transaction a clear betrayal of trust, each one proving that she'd been planning her exit long before our marriage fell apart. Emily's lawyer looked visibly shaken, and he struggled to come up with any defense. The judge's face grew stern as he reviewed the evidence, asking Emily's lawyer to explain how she could justify such blatant dishonesty. They had no answer. In one swift decision, the judge ruled that not only would Emily receive nothing from our assets, but she would also be ordered to return the money she had taken from our joint account over the years. With this new information, her case was effectively destroyed. Any hope she had of walking away with even a fraction of what she'd aimed for was gone. As the court adjourned, I watched her sit there, stunned and defeated. The tables had turned in a way she could never have anticipated. Her last-ditch attempt to take advantage of me had been exposed, and now, she was left with nothing but the consequences of her actions. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. Emily's betrayal had cost her everything, and finally, I could close this chapter for good, free from her lies and deceit. In the days following the final court decision, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. After months of turmoil, betrayals, and gut-wrenching discoveries, it was finally over. Emily had no further claims, no leverage, and no chance of dragging this out any longer. She'd lost everything she tried to take from me, and in the process, she'd revealed herself as someone I barely recognized. After the judge's ruling, Emily was ordered to return every dollar she'd siphoned off over the years. That hidden stash she'd been building. Now it would all come back to me. And with the ruling finalized, there was no chance of her appealing. She was caught, and there was no undoing the damage she'd done to herself. I started the process of moving her things out of my life once and for all. The few items she'd left behind at our house, the last remnants of our life together, I put them in storage and arranged for her to pick them up on her own time. I didn't want to see her, didn't want any more parting words or attempts to explain. We were done. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd unintentionally drifted from during the years I'd been focused on my marriage. With them, I found pieces of myself I'd forgotten about, the version of me before all the lies, the secrets, and the betrayal. I even picked up old hobbies, got back into things I loved, and started making plans for a future without the weight of Emily's deception hanging over me. But the biggest shift came when I returned to my professional life. I'd left things in chaos when I found out about Emily and Rob, but now that the dust had settled, I was able to re-engage with my work, my team, and the projects I loved. My colleagues and boss, who had been supportive throughout the ordeal, welcomed me back without question. I could finally focus on my goals, without the distraction of a toxic relationship draining my energy and my trust. Months have passed since that last courtroom battle, but it feels like a lifetime. With the judge's decision, Emily lost everything she'd schemed so hard to gain. She was left with nothing, not a single dollar from my assets, no claim to the home we'd shared, and a court order to return every cent she'd stolen. The irony? The hidden account she'd spent years funneling money into, her secret stash for her escape plan, was now emptied out to pay back her debt to me. She'd hoped it would give her a fresh start, a nest egg she could take and run with. Instead, it became her undoing, leaving her stranded, financially ruined, and with nowhere to turn. Emily had burned bridges everywhere she went. The moment our colleagues found out about her affair with Rob and her failed legal grab for my assets, her reputation shattered. Word got around fast in our industry, and suddenly, doors that were once open for her slammed shut. Job offers vanished, interviews turned cold, and even her close friends began to drift away, ashamed to be associated with the scandal she'd created. Emily, who had always prided herself on being admired and respected, was now left with only whispers and judgment wherever she went. But it wasn't just the financial ruin that hit her hard. As it turned out, Rob wasn't exactly eager to stick around after everything fell apart. He'd thought their affair was a temporary fling, something he could brush off once it got inconvenient. But with the court documents exposing their affair, he was left without a single friend in the office. His professional reputation tanked. He'd been demoted from the project he was working on with me and eventually let go when the company decided he was no longer a good fit. The job offers he thought he'd get after the trip. Gone. Rob became an outcast, blamed for a scandal that stained both his and Emily's careers. Soon after the fallout, they turned on each other. Both of them desperate to avoid blame, they each accused the other of being responsible for their ruined lives. Emily claimed Rob had pressured her, telling friends that he was the one who encouraged her to explore life beyond marriage. Rob, on the other hand, swore up and down that Emily had been the one chasing him, insisting it was all harmless fun and dragging him along. They cut all contact, each furious with the other for the disaster their affair had brought. The woman who'd sworn she was in love with him now couldn't even stand to see his face. It was poetic, really. They'd destroyed my life, only to turn on each other like strangers when they had no one else left to blame. While they were facing the rubble of their decisions, I began rebuilding. The court's ruling had cleared the path for me to move forward, free from any financial obligations to Emily. I took a long, honest look at the life I wanted, finally unburdened by her deceit. I moved out of the home we'd once shared, selling it and using the proceeds to fund a new beginning in a place that had always felt like a second chance waiting to happen. I poured myself into my work, and as my focus sharpened, so did my results. New projects came in, each one an opportunity, one approached with a fresh perspective. Without the weight of my broken marriage, my career took off. Promotions, recognition, and new partnerships followed. My colleagues, who'd been supportive through the ordeal, celebrated each success with me, reminding me what real loyalty and friendship looked like. It was like I'd come back to life, finally free to achieve the dreams I'd put on hold. Eventually, I began traveling, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the freedom to pursue during my marriage. I visited places I'd only seen in movies, hiked mountains I'd once thought were out of reach, and found a deep sense of peace in places far from where my old life had collapsed. I'd always thought I'd need a partner by my side for adventures like these, but I found something even more fulfilling, confidence and happiness in my own company. One evening, while watching a sunset over the ocean halfway across the world, I realized I'd found something invaluable: closure. I'd let go of the bitterness, the anger, and the regrets. Emily and Rob had both dug their own graves, trapped in the lives they'd chosen for themselves. Neither one of them could hurt me anymore. They were strangers now, shadows of a past I'd left behind. The life I'd rebuilt was my own, without her lies, without his betrayal. For the first time, I felt whole. And standing there on that beach, watching the last traces of daylight disappear, I knew that whatever came next, it would be on my terms. Emily and Rob were left with nothing, bound by their own poor choices, while I was free to live a life that was truly mine. In the end, I'd found everything they'd lost: peace, purpose, and a future filled with promise. I'd won, not by destroying them, but by finding myself again and finally closing the door on a past that no longer had any power over me. Months passed, and life had truly turned a corner. My new city, new friends, and even the career milestones felt like rewards for surviving the chaos Emily and Rob had left behind. I was finally thriving, living a life filled with excitement, peace, and new possibilities. But just when I thought the past was entirely behind me, I received a message that shook everything up again. One evening, as I was wrapping up work, I saw an email pop up in my inbox, from Emily. My heart skipped, but curiosity got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Jake, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to tell you something. I'm truly sorry for everything I did, and I'm paying the price every single day. But I think you should know what happened to Rob. Maybe it's just a bit of closure for both of us, but it's not what you might expect." My curiosity was piqued, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know what had happened to him. I closed the email, but the message nagged at me all night. Finally, the next morning, I did a quick online search for Rob's name. What I found shocked me. Rob had spiraled hard after he lost his job. It turned out he'd been cut off from his network, unable to find work, and his reputation had never recovered. He'd left the industry entirely and was barely scraping by, working odd jobs that had nothing to do with his former career. But the most shocking part? He'd been caught embezzling from his new company, a desperate attempt to regain the lifestyle he'd once had. He'd been arrested, awaiting trial, facing a sentence that would likely change his life forever. I sat back, absorbing the news. Rob's life had completely fallen apart, even worse than Emily's, and it felt surreal. Here was a man who had once been a friend, a colleague, someone I trusted with not only work but personal things, too. And now? He was a stranger who had lost everything, entirely by his own doing. I felt a strange sense of closure wash over me. The people who had betrayed me had faced the full consequences of their actions, but none of it had come from anything I'd done. They had destroyed themselves, leaving me free to rebuild, unburdened by their lies. Emily's email lingered in my mind, but I didn't feel the need to reply. I didn't owe her, or Rob, any more of my time or energy. I closed my laptop, feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time since everything happened, I felt fully at peace, knowing that I had come out of this hole, and even stronger. Walking outside, I watched the sun dip below the horizon, knowing that life was truly mine again, free from shadows of betrayal. Whatever came next, it would be something I built, without the weight of the past holding me back. And for the first time, I realized that was the most satisfying revenge of all, living a life where their actions could no longer touch me.